Today, we're tackling more Browse-Held-High type material with Rage, a 2009 experimental film written and directed by Sally Potter. My feelings about Rage are similar to how Todd in the Shadows views Party Rock Anthem by LMFAO. It's bad, but I can't bring myself to hate it. The filmmakers claim to have returned to a genre called naked cinema. On her website, Sally Potter described her film as extremely low budget and aesthetically naked, naked in the sense of a form being laid bare. In a December 2009 interview with the BBC, Potter explained that naked cinema is supposed to show truths about people and unravel illusions by just putting an actor in front of the camera, without all the distracting edits and special effects in a lot of modern movies. This is admirable in theory, but Potter went too far and stripped her film of virtually any reason to care. Rage is under Milkwood for the 21st century, but without Dylan Thomas's pleasant lyricism. This frustratingly minimalist film is one of the least engaging movies that I've ever seen in my entire life. The thin plot concerns an unseen, unheard student who interviews various fashion figures during the course of a week. During that time, a couple of the models die under suspicious circumstances. Rage has an ensemble cast that includes Judi Dench, Steve Buscemi, Eddie Izzard, John Leguizamo, and, curiously, Jude Law as a drag queen. First of all, Rage completely violates the show don't tell rule in storytelling. The people on screen are upfront in telling us who they are, what they do, what their ideas are, and what is happening, which is a really lazy way to introduce characters and detail events. For what it's worth, the acting is very good. I like some of the characters, and they share some interesting insights about vanity and the importance of image. However, our connection with these characters would have been much more meaningful if we had watched their lives and experiences. I feel like I know Ash from Avalon or Antonius Block from the Seventh Seal because I followed them on their journeys from one place and plot point to the next. If they had just talked about the chess game with death, or defeating the Citadel and reaching Class SA, I wouldn't have felt nearly as close to these characters. Despite Rage's intimate focus on the actors above, or rather to the omission, of all else, we don't really know its characters, as their monologues lack the depth given by experience and showing us their actions. Minx and Mr. White do have basic character arcs, but these are in response to events we never see, which I'll go into more detail on in a moment. Again, a couple of the characters, mainly the poet Merlin and the grizzled photographer Frank, are fairly intriguing, but the rest are uninteresting, the dialogue is often contrived, and the pacing is extremely slow and plodding. Rage's main problem is how detached it is from its own plot. There are various plot developments, such as the death of the models, the naming of a new fragrance, and the student leaking his interviews to a website, but since they all happen off-screen, it's hard to get involved in the drama. In Reservoir Dogs, which is, incidentally, another Steve Buscemi movie, we don't see the failed diamond heist either, but this doesn't matter, as the events before and after the robbery are so vivid. Reservoir Dogs tells us about the heist, but shows us the aftermath, and the showing is dynamic. New people arrive, the stakes escalate, twists occur, and flashbacks are launched. We don't get that kind of complexity and finesse out of Rage. The characters' moods change, but we hardly know or care about the characters, and the presentation never ever changes. Two models die within a week, but since the fashion figures are always talking in front of a green screen, there is no visual indication that a given scene is more important than another. As such, much of Rage feels weightless and hollow. I know the film is intended to show people's reactions to events rather than the events themselves, but this isn't enough. Some of the characters confront the student about him leaking his footage to a website, but since we never see him do this, it's hard to care. The student is implied to be a kind of whistleblower in uploading his interviews to the internet, but the unseen protests he causes happen for undefined reasons, so we get no sense of what the company is doing wrong to warrant these protests. The fragrance subplot isn't interesting, and if it's hard to care about characters we haven't been able to connect with, it's almost impossible to care about the deaths of the models, whom we never once see. Since all the action happens off-screen and is only hinted at through sound effects and the characters' dialogue telling us about them, we can't get invested in anything that happens in the film. I should mention that Rage suffers from what I call Mulholland Velvet syndrome, named after the first two patients I diagnosed. Like those two David Lynch movies, Rage only gets good in the last 10 to 20 minutes. I'm not entirely sure. For all the telling the movie does, it's still vague in parts, but I think Merlin went on a killing spree, that we never see, during the show. This is a decent twist, as I kinda liked Merlin, but it's too little, too late. Finally, Rage has no conclusion. The week is over, but none of the plot threads are resolved, and the ending lacks any sense of closure. In writing this review, I tried my absolute best to be completely honest with myself in this critique. Does Rage have a couple of fun characters? Yes. Do they sometimes have intriguing things to say? Yes. Is the film shot well? Yes. Though maybe a little too well if it's supposed to be shot on a cell phone. But is Rage bad? Yes. Now we get to the big talking points for the recap. Do films need to be fast-paced? Of course not, but a slow-paced film needs to be eventful or fascinating for it to be worthwhile. Rage is neither of those things, for the most part. When a film tells instead of shows, is that necessarily bad? Not always, but it is here, as most of the characters are boring, the dialogue is pretentious, and the delivery is so static and dull. Is it necessarily wrong that all of the action takes place off-screen? It is in this case, as we can't engage with the events if they're just blandly told to us. I've done everything I can to cover my bases and accurately explain why I think that Rage is a terrible movie. Rage is probably the most boring, tedious, and unengaging movie I've ever seen. But I don't hate it. Writer-director Sally Potter had good intentions in her efforts to push boundaries and comment on the fashion industry, and I can't really get worked up about what is essentially a big pile of nothing. Here's a fun bit of trivia. Rage was the first film to ever premiere on cell phones. If only a better movie had gotten that distinction. Rage earns 1.5 stars out of 5. Thanks for watching. Cheers.